Hi, this is the maintenance video for build 53. In this new build, there are several new things, and one of them is user functions, which is probably the big thing about this build. And user functions allow you to use L scripts to process values, which you can return back to Janus, and I'll show how that works in a moment. There are also two new subcommands called group item and iterate, and they're like special subcommands that'll enable you to break out things in a different way, and I will demonstrate that later as well. But before I get into it, I'd like you to see a small GUI control that I've added in, and it's this drop down over here. This drop down contains a quick recall of the constants that are available, constant variables rather, that's available in Janus. After the constant variables, there are the subcommand variables. These are user defined, and that is also reflected in the notes field, as you can see. At the very end, there's a thing called functions, or func, and this is the new user functions. And the purpose of this pop-up is when you click on an entry, it will quickly add it over to this to the active value. If I click on another one, you will see that it gets appended at the end. And if you want to change the behavior so that it replaces it, you go over to your preferences and go to GUI, then deselect. Selecting notes list appends the field. This will probably have to be changed in the future to reflect that it's not just the notes field behavior, but the value field as well. So now if I would click on scene name, you'd see that it will always change. So again, this behavior is quite the same as what you would find in the notes field. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about user functions. Now, a user function is it's a bit similar to what you find in subcommand variables or constant variables, but instead of simply just having one value that changes, a user function uses L script to process something, and you define that because you would have to code it, and then that value, whatever that code processes, will head back to Janus to be replaced. Now, I received a question about how to modify output breakout file names so that it conforms to a particular format. The format was something like this. I'll show you. Base scene name, and then a dash followed it, a render pass name and version. And the original file name was this setup tree version 001. Now the issue is with the version name over here, and Janus sees the whole master scene name as the base name, which is the whole thing. It cannot distinguish automatically which is the version name and which is the base scene name. So there needs to be a way to do that, and Janus tries to address this, and does address it, through the use of a user function which executes a parsing procedure on the scene name. So let me show you that function that I've used. I have two functions actually. The first is this function called get base scene name. It has a prefix here, but I'll tell you all more about that. Now what this function does actually is simply accepts a scene name and sort of parses it so that it kind of strips out the underscore and the version 001 and simply return this name. I have another counterpart for the version. It's called get scene version, in which it does the reverse. In other words, it just gets the version 001. So what I'm going to do is go back to the Janus interface, and I'm going to use these two functions to modify the output file names. Now I've done something here already, but of course I'm going to show it to you how I did it. So I'm going to activate this. I'm going to enable that. I'm going to select one of my render passes, and what I'm going to do here is to maybe it's better for me to recall the thing here. For example, get scene version. Okay. Get function get base scene name. So this is the syntax that I use. So what I'm going to do is, okay, I'm going to get the base scene name, but I also have to provide it with the scene name. So what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to go and type jn scene name. So that's my constant variable. And then if I follow the format, I have to insert the render pass name. And so I go over here, and let me just use the GUI and make sure I have appending so that I can just string them all up. So for example, I'll put in the dash here, and then I'll put in pass name, and then I'll put in here an underscore. Remember, I'm following this, so I'll put an underscore and then the version. Okay, so I'll go over here and get scene version, and I'll place arg1 with jn scene name again. So hopefully you're understanding how this all seems to work, that getting a function and then feeding that, it goes back to this user function script, which I'll tell you more about later, executes this, does its processing, and then whatever it does, the final value goes back to Janus to be replaced. So let me go run this and show you the result. There you go. So if you look at the final thing here, this is the base name, the setup tree, but as you can see, it's been stripped off. There's no version 001. There is the pass name, and then the version name at the end. So through the use of user functions, you're able to do some special processing so that you can get and you can fit your particular workflow, or rather Janus can fit into your particular workflow. So just remember that when you're calling a function, it's the same as subcommand variables, where you have the sc, then the colon, then the subcommand, and then the colon again to terminate it. In this case, what you want to do is call func, put a colon in there, and then call your function, feed it whatever it needs to feed, if you need to feed it any variable, and then just terminate with a colon, and then you basically called that function. Now I want to go and look at how we build some of these user functions, and it gives you a better idea of just of the steps. And it's quite simple actually. There are just several rules that you need to follow. First, this Janus user function is already provided for in the support files. So it will be a new support file in the support files. Now, this must also be loaded as a plugin, or rather registered as a plugin in Lightwave. So you just just install the plugin or the script normally. Now, what you don't want to do is to modify anything above this this line. It says modify only code below this line. Here is Janus specific functions that you don't want to touch because it communicates with Janus. So when you're creating a new function, what you want to do is to first register a name. So in the init function list, there's a list of functions here that will appear in the pop-down. But it's also very important, because if you don't register the function, Janus will not pick it up. I'm going to create a function now. I'm just going to duplicate this line, and I'm going to say return hello Okay, so that's going to be my new function. Now when I want to start defining that function, I have to prefix that function name with JNUF, which stands for Janus user function, underscore, and then type in the same name, return hello. And also you have to have always an argument list called arglist, or any name you want. It could be just val or whatever, but I'll just use arglist for the sake of consistency. This arglist must be an array, or rather you have to treat it as if it was an array, because Janus will call this function and feed it a string array. Now you can use it or not use it, that's up to you. It depends on how you design it. In this case, I'm not going to feed it anything really, just a blank array. So what it's going to do here is just simply return the string hello. Okay, I'm going to save this. So now when you go back to Janus, you can start using the function normally. You don't have to restart anything. So I'm going to go over here to the notes field, and I'm going to use that function over here. So normally if you use the notes field and you output, let's say, frame size, you know that it's dynamically replaced. So what I'm going to do is just call function, and I'm going to say return hello. And remember that it's case sensitive as well. So press enter, you'd see that the thing is hello. If I go change it immediately, for example, hello there, save that, and probably just enter again, you'd see that immediately the value is reflected. And you can use this to test some of your functions. It doesn't always apply though, so just be careful. But for simple return values such as this, it can work. So now I'd like to introduce two new subcommands, which is group item and iterate. And using these two subcommands along with the user function, I want to do some advanced kind of behavior and breakouts. And it may give you some ideas on how Janus works and probably some new techniques. Now I have here a scene of trees. Now what I like to do is to separate each tree into its own render layer, or at least render pass, just to separate them out in a breakout. Now, but ordinarily, what you do is you create a render pass per tree. But if I wanted to be efficient about it, I will try to use the new subcommands in order to only maintain one render layer, and that render layer is sort of manages all the breakouts for all 7 trees. So what I'm going to do is open up my scene editor, and I'm just going to go and select say my tree group. I'm going to select all my 7 trees. I'm going to create a render pass from the layout selection. I'm going to click in BTY2, and I'm going to leave this unchecked. In other words, I want them to be assigned to a group individually, but create only one render pass. So I'm going to click OK. Again, I'm going to check the group that it's associated with and make sure that yes, indeed, that all my trees are individually assigned. Now I'm going to type in here iterate, and I'm going to type in 7, and I'm going to add the plus. So what this is doing is, when I execute this, it will iterate or repeat the same breakout 7 times. By itself, it's pointless because it will just keep on breaking out the same pass. So what we need to do is to change something per pass, or per execution of the breakout. So this is where the group item subcommand comes in. So I'm going to type in here group item, and I already have here a function. Just remove that. Now the group item tells Janus which index in the item here that that will be rendered basically. So it gives you more granular control. Ordinarily, all of them will be rendered, but if you use group item, you will only specify the index that you want. You can specify the index in this way. For example, just like when you do printing, you can specify a range like 1 to 5, for example. You can put a comma there and you can say 10, 21, 12 or something. And then these ranges are actually will be 1 to 5, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it skips. So you can use that. It'll be fine. But the idea is that when you specify group item, only those specified indices will be rendered, and the indices refer to the items in group list. So now we know that, we still need to sort of iterate or increment the group item as it goes, so that if I iterate the first time or execute the first time, trunk 1 will be rendered, and if it goes to the second iteration, then a group item should be 2, rendering the second one. So how do you iterate something as you're processing it? We're going to use we're going to use a user function called getInth, and getInth is actually provided for in Janus's the Janus user function. So I'm going to go down here, and there's a getInth user function, and what it does, it's doing a global recall on the JN process inth. And if you don't recall, this is actually a post or pre-breakout variable, and this is part of the script system in Janus, and there's no other way to get this variable than by executing a script. So that's why we need to use a function in this case. So what's happening here is that the process inth is something that Janus always populates for every execution for on the pass, on the render pass. So if you execute this once, the process inth will be a value of 1, and if the second execution will be value of 2, and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to do is I'm going to specify group item, and I'm going to put down here getInth, and I'm going to add that to my render pass. And so this is the full thing. It's going to iterate 7 times, and the group item will be replaced by the inth pass, so that if the first iteration is being executed, group item will be 1, the second group item will be 2, so it just goes down and down, rendering them separately. But of course, they will always be the same output file format. That's another problem. So if you go over here and say you have let's say you're the same kind of format that we had back then, we can probably append something here. For example, right here, underscore, and we'll specify getInth, so that for every increment, there's always an appending like 1, 2, 3, 4 that it increments as well, so it sort of makes every breakout unique. Let's save those changes. And what I'm going to do is break this out and look at the result. So if you take a look at the end result, you'd see that the render pass was created from the single render pass execution. It has created 7. You can see processed 1 of 1 selected passes for iteration 1 of 7. And you can see that the file name at the end is an underscore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. What I'm going to do now, just ignore this warning over here. That's something to do with the user function here that I got rid of. So I'll just disable that. It's not important. So what I'm going to do is give you a sample of the test render of this one. So over here, I'm going to go and do a test render. And so, as you can see, each individual tree has been rendered out. And so on and so forth.